Throughout what could be called my tabletop RPG career, I have been mostly a GM. Not the so-called forever GM who could never find a game to play, but still, I run games much more often than I played in them myself. Why? I enjoy world building, both when I do it myself and when my GM does it. As a player, I like learning about the game world and how different characters fit into it. And since you cannot explore the entire world within the confines of a single game, I like to revisit settings to explore different parts and aspects of the game world. And it seems that not many GMs do that nowadays. I often see games that are basically one-shots. After the game is done, the setting is thrown into the bin. That feels like blasphemy to me. And when I run games, I tend to do it in the same persistent setting. This is why when I was making my Caroline setting, one of the design goals was to create something that would give me enough content for the rest of my life. And I am being absolutely serious here. I am passionate about D&D, GURPS and tabletop RPGs in general, and I think that I will remain passionate and enthusiastic about them until I die. This is why I also love such settings as the Forgotten Realms. It's huge and it's obviously a passion project. Nowadays, when I read RPG-related discussion online, I encounter the sentiment that world building is not only unnecessary, but is pretty much a sin more and more often. At first, I thought that it's merely shitposting, but it seems that some people genuinely believe that. To me, that sounds stupid and also heartbreaking. Maybe I'm a grognard, but enough about that. Let's say that you decided to create your own fantasy setting. Where do you start? What resources do you have? What books should you read? If you're limiting yourself to GURPS, then your main source of advice should be GURPS Fantasy. This book is often misunderstood. People refer to it as to a genre book, but it's mostly a world-building book. But why limit yourself to GURPS? Let's take a look at what D&D 3.5 had for GMs interested in world-building. After all, you're making a fantasy world. And we have 9 pages in the Dungeon Master's Guide. That can't be all you've got, right? Well, Cityscape can be considered a world-building book, but only for one aspect of the world, urban environments. Deities and demigods has some advice on pantheon creation, and I believe that's it. Okay, maybe Pathfinder does a better job. Let's open up Pathfinder core rulebook. Oh, there's literally nothing. This feels strange. I genuinely enjoy the Pathfinder campaign setting books. I think they are written excellently. But there's absolutely zero material for those who'd like to create their own Pathfinder world. I guess you have to play in Golarion. Well, that sucks. Let's check out AD&D. Would you look at that? World Builder's Guidebook. At 98 pages, this 1996 book contains virtually everything you need to create a fantasy world. And it's 99% system agnostic too. So don't scoff at it for being tied to AD&D. It's filled to the brim with actually useful information that is easy to read and understand. You know how some people claim that GURPS is difficult and incomprehensible? You should try reading something like Area Worlds to understand what difficult to comprehend is. Let's take a look at the table of contents. We have an introduction and 6 chapters. I have to say that even the introduction is packed with some stuff useful for novice world builders. While the Dungeon Master's Guide described only 2 approaches to world building, inside out and outside in, this book's first chapter describes 7 of them: macroscopic, microscopic, sociological, character-based, situation-based, historical and literary. Aside from that, it contains a table of world hooks if you do not know where to start. Basically, every aspect of the book is presented as a random table in case you want to leave things to chance, instead of choosing them yourself, and I love it. And each step also has an example that is very useful. The second chapter talks about the size and shape of the world, water coverage, tectonics and climate. It supports planes of different shapes, from the typical roughly spherical one to a literal D20. The different world sizes also provide useful advice for how big a hex on the world map, kingdom map and local map should be. Hexes are very convenient, as you can easily find free hex mapping software online, and hexes feel very GURPS. I like that almost everything is written in two ways, for those who want a more realistic world, and for those who do not care about such things as tectonic plates, ocean currents and prevailing winds. This is a very nice touch, especially since the book explains why such things might matter. Chapter 3 talks about creating landmasses, seas, different terrain types, rivers, lakes, sentient races on the scale of a continent, not the entire world. Chapter 4 stays on the continental and kingdom scale, but talks more about the culture, government, population and resources. I found it extremely useful. Chapter 5 zooms in even more and talks about designing cities, towns, villages and provinces, alongside with the wilderness ecologies. This chapter has almost everything you could find in Cityscape for D&D 3.5 and even more. The final chapter talks about history and mythology. Yet again, it has what you could have found in the Deities and Demigods book, but even more. The history chapter is very similar to the history generation article from Pyramid. Again, I have to reiterate that this book only contains useful information, trimmed of all the fat. The book is only 98 pages long, but it's not the size that matters, it's how you use it. Because man, Area Worlds was a traumatizing read, even though it does have some nice stuff. Honestly speaking, I found this book much more useful than GURPS Fantasy. If I had to rate it, I would rate it 10 out of 10. I highly recommend you obtain a PDF of it somewhere and give it a read. You won't regret it. But why am I talking about all this? First of all, I am doing some world building on my own right now. While my Careerland setting can be considered more or less complete, world building is an unending process. I do have all the general, macroscopic information written up, but it's time to go microscopic and take a look at some regions of the world in much more detail. So this book has been extremely useful to me in that regard. It also got me thinking, why didn't we have anything of that sort in D&D 3.5 and Pathfinder? I asked my OSR enthusiast friend, and he said the following. In my opinion, it's because later editions focus too much on combat and player build options instead of esoteric GM resources focused on dungeon crawling and other non-combat forms of play. And of course, the reason they decided to do that would be because appealing to players equals 5 books sold, appealing to GMs equals 1 book sold. This simple answer opened my eyes. Really, if you take a look at the D&D 3.5 library, you'll see that it's mostly about combat and player build options. Even D&D 3.0 did have some more out there stuff like Deities and Demigods or Stronghold Builder's Guidebook, but 3.5 didn't even have that. Pathfinder goes even further in that direction. And I would like to add that this is one of the very good examples of a sentiment that I'm advocating for all the time. When you are using GURPS, do not be restricted to GURPS books. Every book is a GURPS book for you. So thank you for watching and I will see you next time.